All right, welcome. My name is Amanda Poss. I'm the gallery director for Hillsborough Community College, and I'm here speaking with Saumitra Chandratreya, one of our featured artists for Touchy, form, function, and contemporary fiber. So, Saumitra, I'd like you to start for our audience by simply introducing yourself.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for having me today. My name is Saumitra Chandratreya. I'm a textile installation artist. I kind of describe myself as a visual artist now. It's so funny to say the specifics of it. But I work in visual art. I graduated from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2017 with masters in this hybrid program called Fashion, Body, and Garment, which sits at the intersection of fine art, performance, and fashion. So it was this really incredible experience. I was trained in textile design in India at a very experimental art and design school where, it was I kind of joined the school to be an industrial designer, and then I saw textiles, and like a whole new world opened up for me. So I come to textiles as like purely. I came to textiles then for purely aesthetic purposes, and I feel like I can express a lot of my identities through a lot of textiles that I work on. So I find it as a very immediate medium that I go to make things. And I'm also teaching at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago now in the fashion department. So I feel like I've come a full circle in a way.
Yeah, it's such fun and exciting news. And you're giving us a perfect transition. I'd like to dig into your work a little bit. So could you briefly outline your artistic practice and the concepts raised by your work, especially as it relates to the artworks we have on view in the gallery?
Sure. I started working in textiles as a way to just explore what cloth can do, and as someone who is interested in the kind of end uses of textiles, I was really drawn to what are the ways we can manipulate fabrics, what are the ways we can kind of adorn them. We can, there are ways to kind of weave them in a way that says something about you. There are ways to print that I'm really attracted to. The labor of it all is also something that I'm interested in unpacking and talking about and criticizing. And as someone who comes from these rich textile traditions, I felt like it was an apt medium for me to make work in. And I find them really fascinating because you can tear them, you can sew them, you can tie them, you can put paint on them, you can hang them, you can drape them. There are just so many different ways to work with textiles. It really excites me to talk about them and kind of to talk about the process. But the work, so there are two distinct kinds of work I have in the show. One is kind of like these self-portraits that are that came from like these selfies that I was taking, and then I was kind of just storing them in my phone without really thinking too much about them. I was spending kind of like a month in Chicago with some friends. I think this was probably 2019 or 2021. I'm forgetting the timeline of it. But my room was kind of at the top of their house. And so it was, it had like these big skylights that would like flood the room with sunlight every morning. And so I kind of started taking a selfie a day, like in like this ray of light. And I was storing them without really thinking about them. And then when Florida passed the notorious "Don't Say Gay" law, I kind of started thinking about those selfies as something of just like an ode to my queerness and myself as, something that maybe someone who is afraid to live their kind of own truth could kind of benefit from seeing. And so I was doing the Pride show at Chad Mize's gallery, Mize Gallery, in June of 2022, and to make work for that gallery, I chose like 24 of these selfies, and I had them just as like a grid on a canvas, and that was kind of like my way of showing that you can be yourself without having to filter yourself in a way, even in like a really harsh political climate.
Yeah.
And so that's where kind of like the journey for like these works began. And at the same time, I was really getting interested in cyanotype as a medium and a method. And I have always been interested in it, but I really never thought that I had anything to add to it, or like in a way, like I didn't really think that like I had like a good kind of work to explore it with. And then when I was working with these selfies, I was like, oh, this is a great material to explore cyanotypes with. So I first kind of started just printing my selfies on translucent sheets and then making cyanotypes with them, just like my selfies themselves. And then as I was making them, I kind of started thinking about a body of work that could include my surrounding and kind of a nostalgia for a place that I no longer live in. So I kind of started thinking about what are those elements of like my immediate neighborhood that also remind me of India, where I'm from. And so I was living in St. Petersburg at that time, and my neighborhood is between like a lake and the bay, and so it's very tropical. It's very green. There's a creek that runs through my neighborhood, so there were like these mangroves that were planted in the creek to stop the erosion and to stop the impact of a tide when it comes in. And so like this work is kind of has like all these layers of being in a place that is starting to feel the effects of climate change, but at the same time there were things done like way back in the past to already mitigate some of those, and then how all of that foliage, all of these things kind of add to my like me being there and kind of our collective humanity colliding with nature, and like how we all kind of live together in a way. And so like these works have like some of those elements in it. And then I'm really drawn to clouds as I just find them fascinating as just forms and shapes. And so I remember I went to my studio one day, and then as I got out of the car, there was like this big, humongous cloud just in my vision, like right in front of me. And so I just decided to take a picture of it, and then I started using that to add to my selfies. And I also included a Royal Point sienna leaf because I grew up in Mumbai that has like a lot of Royal Point sienna trees around, and so like that kind of became like a symbol of that nostalgia. Um, and I started using mangroves as kind of a layer to all of that as well. And so this work kind of developed from that, um, and then I started kind of printing my cyanotypes on like a bigger scale because I really wanted to play with the scale. I like challenging myself to kind of push the medium that I'm working in fully. And so for me, it was a challenge to print a cyanotype that big. And, I had a very funny story of how I printed the work that's the Royal Point sienna reflections because, I couldn't really take, cyanotype needs a lot of strong light to work, and it wasn't possible to kind of take fabric that doesn't have like a particular form to take it from my studio to outside in order to develop it and then bring it back in without losing the control over it. So I had to form like this contraption in my studio in order to print it. So I'm actually really proud of that work because I was able to get it done like the way I wanted it to be done. And we can talk about like the details of that in like next questions. And then the second body of work are the two pieces, the pleasure chest and treasure chest. And it's funny, these are actually also made for a Mice Gallery show, but I think in 2022 or 2021, I'm forgetting that, but it was a fiber show that Chad did, and at that time, I was kind of working with like my body dysmorphia and kind of just my body image and self-image, and so these are it's a woven cloth which was printed with this refracted image of my chest, and then once I got it woven, I kind of cut around it in that shape of a hide, and then I printed on top of it just in certain locations strategically to kind of make it seem like that it's like a hide pulled away, or like hide that's kind of getting ready to be processed. It was kind of like this idea of like my skin as like a hide or meat and things like that. So those are the works that I have in the show, and I'm really, because I'm so interested in textiles, like I kind of like working with them in a lot of different ways, and so I have cyanotypes and I have these woven cloths that are installed on like a wooden panel.
It's such a versatile material, and I think it lends itself well to this like layering, both literal and then this conceptual layering that you're doing and you're describing, which is a lovely segue to our next question, which is how do you use or address any traditional textile techniques with the works on view or not? And if yes, then how is this reflected conceptually?
I think in the cyanotype works that I have in the show, I have used some embroidery techniques. So I print the cyanotypes and then I embroider on top of them. And the embroidery is a very traditional. They are very simple stitches because like I like embroidery a lot. Like hand embroidery takes a lot of time. And so in order to make these works, I just wanted to stick to very simple stitches, but that are effective in kind of doing a border or like a line around, or these stitches would be used as like sort of like a border or to make a line on cloth. And so in window clouds, there is a simple stitch called backstitch where you make a stitch and then you go back and then you add to the stitch. And so it's kind of this interesting back and forth, literally, in the stitch. And it's fascinating to me to kind of use that stitch because the detail in that work that has embroidery on it is inspired by a window from Taj Mahal, and there is this interesting conversation that's been going on in India about kind of naming things and like changing the name from India to Bharat, and like there is just like all this weird kind of all this like weird conversation about like, oh, like what does like changing the name mean, and and so it's kind of like this again back and forth literally in culture of like what a place should be, and like there are all these like conspiracy claims that like Taj Mahal was actually a temple and like blah blah, and so like there is like this Hindu right-wing propaganda against like one of the most beautiful structures in the world. And so to me, like that stitch kind of also represents that like back and forth, but also like using like the pink to make that stitch was kind of my way of A, showing my queerness, and also B, kind of relating it to Florida. And like I love the contrast of pink against that blue. It also shows the dichotomy of how like two genders are all like the gender binary is always kind of placed on kids as we are growing up, and how like using both of those in that work, they are also like kind of challenging your like notion of like should those two be placed together or not. um, and um, and the I have used embroidery also um, on the work called Throne, and there I have just used it uh, as like something to emphasize the importance um, of just the flora around us, and like how just having that nostalgia for me was something that made Florida make it feel like a lot more homey than it would otherwise. And having kind of like the Royal Poinciana trees in my neighborhood and having mango trees in my neighborhood really kind of reminds me of like the tropics that I come from, and so it's and that's the way that I wanted to reflect on that as well.
Yeah, I think we tend to think about the world in simple terms or in dichotomies, right? But it's often not those. And life is not so simple. It is messy. It's time isn't linear. It's often cyclical. So I like that, and thinking about just the way that you're stitching this back and forth. So it's like a meditation in the process of these larger things in our lives. I think that's a really beautiful sentiment.
Yeah, and in order to actually do the embroidery on cyanotype, I was really stressed because I needed to get the design on this fabric that I had printed, and I didn't want to mess it up, and so like I had, for good caution, I had printed like 2 or 3 of them just in case. And so I traced the embroidery on the cyanotype with like a white carbon paper, and uh, again, because I only had like letter-sized sheets of carbon paper, I had to tile them together in order to get like the size that I wanted. And also I made the design in Illustrator, had to get that printed. And again, at that time, the only printer I had in the studio was like a 8.5 by 11. And so,
it's a home office printer.
yeah. I had to like tile that together first, and then have the carbon paper tiled, and then place that on the printed textile, and then trace it out, and then embroider. So it was kind of like this amazing process to like go through in order to get that effect that I wanted. And like I deliberately left the lines from the carbon paper on the rest of the cyanotype. So like you see, when you're close to the work, you see the white lines of the carbon paper, and where I haven't gone over with the embroidery. So yeah, I don't know. I really love laborious processes. So,
Artists are great problem solvers, so that creativity, and I like that weaves together, past and present too, because you're talking about something as age old as embroidery, but then getting a design in Illustrator and printing it, and then carbon copy. So it's all these things all at once, and I like that the history of that process is left evident if we're looking closely and paying attention. My next question is about tactility, and one of the things that I'm most drawn to in the show, and I know others are as well, is that sense of touch, the texture, that tactility. So not only does it allow viewers to engage with artwork in a different way, to that simple act of touching, we're so trained to not touch for very good reason, most artworks that we encounter in galleries and museums. But on a conceptual level, then I think it also then is a way to dismantle or challenge traditional barriers, such as between viewer and object, high and low. So wanted to ask what you hope this communicates to the viewer in dismantling these barriers. And you've already been speaking to layers and convergence, or how you hope that might affect their experience. Because so far we've been talking about the pieces that people are not allowed to touch, but you did add into the show a piece that has direct engagement.
Yeah, for me, textiles are all about touch and feel. And I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about this because I remember it's hard when I see a piece of fabric, it's hard not to touch it or feel it, or, like just run my fingers through it. It's such a tactile medium. And so when I was thinking about that interactive piece in the show, I really wanted the viewers to engage with it in a very simple way. And I was thinking about printing as this immediate process, and that gives you instant gratification once you do it. It's as immediate as using a paintbrush to make a mark for me. And I chose it because the block printing that people engage with in that piece is like this really simple way of printing. You use the ink, you kind of roll it on the plexiglass, and then you roll it on the block that's provided, and then you make your mark. And I was looking at some of the pictures that James had sent over, and it's fascinating to see how people used the blocks to make their own motifs. It is amazing to see that like their creativity still came through, even though the instructions on the sheet didn't really, say anything about that. And for me, engaging in something so tactile and so immediate kind of gives you so much inspiration to make things. I remember the first textile class that I took in undergrad, all we did was like make kind of stamps out of whatever materials we had available. So we used like soles of like rubber slippers to carve. And like we have I don't know if students do it in the US, but like in India, like you use like potatoes to carve out things, or you kind of cut okra in kind of half, and then you use kind of like the flowery motif like that you see on that segment of okra as like a motif to kind of make patterns in like middle school and high school.
So beautiful. Yeah.
It's kind of, I have had like all this interesting like training that I had without even consciously thinking about it. And so to me, kind of printmaking comes as like this really basic, really immediate way of expressing your thoughts. And so I think for me, it was important for when the viewer interacted with that piece, that like it was immediate and that it was simple. And I also wanted to keep the choice of kind of colors at minimum as well, and just keep it black and white, and like black fabric with white ink, to kind of just reverse the expectation of like a white substrate and then a black ink on top of it. And I chose like this tussar silk fabric because it's like this really beautiful fabric that you see the weave on. You see like how it is, because it's a natural fiber. You see where the fiber was denser and then not dense, and you see those levels in it. And so I wanted to keep that idea of fabric. And it's a really common fabric in India, so I wanted to keep that aspect of it alive as well.
The flip side then of letting people interact with the work is the potential degradation over time. So curious how this plays a factor, if at all, with your work in general or with the piece that we have as part of the show.
For that interactive piece, I'm not too worried about degradation because, I can dry clean that piece because it's on silk and it's a run of fabric as opposed to something that has a form that may not be able to be dry cleaned. And so I'm not too worried about it. I also, once I get it back, like I'm really excited to see if I because I know like people also did like their fingerprints on some of them, which to me is almost like I would be scared, right, to like have like my fingerprint on like so like that's interesting to me because it's literally your information like on like someone's work, which is fascinating to me. It's also like, in India, if you don't have, if you are illiterate and you don't know how to sign, you put your thumbprint as like your signature. So I almost feel like that's like a signature of like people, like viewers like labor, and like it's like their way of recording that they were there, which is amazing to think about. And like so like I'm not too worried about degradation. I'm just really excited to see that there are so many people's hands that have interacted with that piece, and I hope that it has inspired someone to take up printmaking, if anything, or like it has inspired them to like get a block or like carve a block or like something to like just engage with the process that way.
I think that's such a lovely thing to express. And we've definitely had, in terms of the engagement, some resonance with the viewers, is that sometimes we think of art as these beautiful, priceless, precious objects, and they are. But I love that in not being so concerned with the degradation and allowing that sort of immediacy and for viewers to break down those barriers, something really beautiful and that speaks of just this moment, this time, right? As it occurs in this space, that's just, you would not be able to access that if you weren't allowing the public into the creative space with you and that kind of co-authorship.
Yeah, and that is like, those are my own printing tables. So like it's also interesting that I can get a piece of my studio out in the gallery, and that process and that thought is also really interesting to me, that like it's like a mini studio just on those tables that people were working with.
So separating or dissolving the barriers between studio and gallery even.
Yeah.
So as our time is wrapping up, the last question I have for you is, as an educational institution, so HCC, I like to ask what advice you can impart for any students or emerging artists who might watch this video.
I think the most important thing is to just like stick with what you want to do and kind of in a way like keep engaging in it. I know it can be frustrating a lot of the times. Like I know like I have wanting to give up on things very often. Like it happens. It's a part of that process because as artists and creative people, you are vulnerable. You're making yourself vulnerable by making work. and then putting it out there. And I think it is important that you stick with it. You know, because we all have our own voices, and if we lose one of your voice, then we would have lost that voice forever. So it is important that like we all stick with what we're doing. And especially now, we need all the voices that we can have in order to kind of make sense of everything that's going on around us. And I tell my students how it's okay that like we live in like this very saturated world that's saturated with images, and it's but how do we use that as a reference point and then kind of make something on our own is very important. Like, don't get too bogged down by the fact that like your thought may not be original. Like, I don't know what that even means anymore. And so, just make things that you want to make, and then see how they fit in the context of the larger world, because that's what we all do on day-to-day basis. That like we make things, and then like none of us live in a vacuum, and so we all make things that are inspired by our surroundings, and so that context is really important, and like kind of you making that work is important. So just stick with it.
Well, thank you for the sage advice, Saumitra, and for speaking with me today. Again, this is Saumitra Chandratreya speaking about their work in touchy-feely form, function, and contemporary fiber on view at Gallery221 at the HCC Dale Mabry campus, now through October 12th. Saumitra, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for having me.